Welcome back to the Deep Dive. If you're a regular listener, you know the drill. We usually take a stack of articles, maybe a new bestseller or a piece of breaking research, and we try to find the narrative thread. We try to figure out what the story is.
But today is different.
It really is. Today, we aren't looking at a story. We're looking at a structure.
We are. We're looking at something architectural in a way.
Right. We are zooming in on a single word, one word that, frankly, takes up a massive amount of real estate in the global consciousness.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It is a word that the moment you hear it, the brain just renders an image. It's almost involuntary.
Yeah.
You hear the vibration of the air and you see black cloth, you see a woman, you see a specific geography, a specific politics, a specific history. It all just appears.
The word is hijab.
Hijab. And immediately you're picturing a scarf.
Right. You're picturing a dress code. You're picturing a boundary, a very specific type of boundary. But the thing is, we have a source on the desk today that is going to cause some serious intellectual vertigo. We're doing a deep dive into a text by J.R. Ahmed titled The Quran and the Myth of Mandated Veiling.
And the central thesis of this text is, well, it's a demolition project.
It really is the demolition project. That's a great way to put it.
It's a teardown. The source argues that the image in your head, that scarf, that veil, is a linguistic hallucination.
A linguistic hallucination.
Yes. Ahmed argues that we have taken a word that means wall and somehow, over centuries, turned it into a wardrobe.
That is a massive claim. I mean, we aren't just talking about a simple translation error here.
No, this is much bigger.
We are talking about centuries of civilization, multiple cultures, operating on a definition that, according to this analysis, doesn't exist in the primary text.
And you have to think about the implications of that, just for a second. If the source is right, then millions of women are wearing a garment that they believe is a divine mandate.
A core part of their faith.
A core part, yes, but which might actually be a cultural artifact, a mistranslation that's solidified into law.
So, okay, before we get into the heavy theology or the history or the psychology of it all, we need to start where this source starts, with the linguistics.
We have to be empiricists.
Exactly. I want to start cold. I want to start with the dictionary. I pulled the Oxford definition and the Wikipedia entry just to ground us in the now, the standard accepted reality of the word.
Let's hear it. What is the consensus reality? What do the dictionaries say?
Okay, so Oxford. It defines decency, generally, as, behavior or appearance that avoids impropriety. Standard stuff.
Sure.
But then we get to hijab. Wikipedia says, a veil traditionally worn by some Muslim women in the presence of adult males outside of their immediate family, which usually covers the head and chest.
Okay, stop there. That is the definition everyone knows. If you walked down the street and asked 100 people, 99 would give you that answer or something very close to it.
Absolutely. It's the default definition in our collective consciousness. But, and this is where the crack in the foundation appears, in that same entry, it admits a contradiction.
Right there in the same article.
Right there. It says, and I'm quoting, the word hijab in the Quran refers not to women's clothing, but rather a spatial partition or curtain.
And there it is. That is the linguistic hook we're hanging this entire deep dive on.
It's everything.
How do you get from spatial partition, a wall, a curtain, a divider, to a piece of cloth on a woman's head?
It's a leap. It's a massive leap.
It's not just a leap. It's a transformation of the entire concept. A partition is architectural. It divides space. A headscarf is sartorial. It covers a person.
One is about geography, the other is about anatomy.
Right. The source material we're covering essentially accuses history of a sleight of hand. It's like saying, I'm going to build a fence, and then you put on a hat and call it a fence.
And if you call the hat a fence for long enough, people forget what a real fence even looks like.
Precisely. The source also breaks down niqab, the face veil, and it notes that this actually predates Islam and was used by other cultures, non-Muslim cultures. But the focus here, the real battleground, is this tension between the dictionary definition, what humans say the word means, and what the source calls the divine architecture of the word.
Divine architecture. I love that phrase. It really captures the essence of the argument.
It's so apt, because we are talking about the structure of a command. If you look at the source text, the Quran, as a blueprint, does it actually tell you to build a wall around a woman's face? Or did we build that wall ourselves and then claim it was in the blueprints all along?
The source argues the latter pretty forcefully. It posits that there is a myth of mandated veiling. So our mission for this hour is to trace that transformation. How did hijab go from a metaphysical separation between, say, man and God to a dress code?
And what happens when we strip away the cultural blindfolds, the things we think we know, and just look at the raw data?
It's a process of unlearning. We have to strip the paint off the wall and see what's actually underneath.
So where do we start?
So let's get into section 1, the semantics of separation. This is where I want to be very, very precise. J.R. Ahmed performs what I can only call a data dump of the word hijab.
He's not just theorizing.
Not at all. He goes through the specific instances where the trilateral root HJB appears in the Quran.
And for the listeners who aren't linguists, in Arabic, that root system is everything. It's like the DNA of a concept. You can't just change the meaning of a root from one verse to another without basically breaking the language.
Right. There has to be a coherent thread.
So if HJB means to separate or to partition or to conceal, it has to mean that everywhere in some form.
Okay, so let's look at the list. We're going to act like forensic accountants here, just looking at the evidence. Item number 1, Surah 7, verse 46.
Okay.
The context is the afterlife. It speaks of a barrier between the people of paradise and the people of hell. And the text uses the word hijab.
A barrier, a separation, a massive wall, essentially. It is preventing the people of hell from entering paradise.
So purely spatial.
Completely. It's not a garment. You don't wear a wall between heaven and hell. It's an impassable structure.
Right. Okay, item number 2, Surah 17, verse 45. This one's a bit different. It talks about reciting the Quran and God placing an invisible veil, hijab, between the person reciting and the disbelievers who don't want to hear it.
Ah, so this is metaphysical.
Exactly.
It's an intellectual block, a cognitive partition. It prevents understanding from passing from one mind to another. It's like a force field of sorts.
It's a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
But again, it's not fabric, is it? It's not a dress.
Not at all. It's a conceptual barrier.
All right, item number 3, Surah 19, verse 16. This is the story of Mary, the mother of Jesus.
Okay.
It says she withdrew from her people. The word used involves that same root, HJB. She places screen or a seclusion, a hijab, between her and her people.
Spatial again. But on a smaller scale, she moved to a different space. She wanted privacy, presumably to give birth or to contemplate.
She put up a screen.
She didn't put a cloth on her head to hide from them. She put actual distance and a physical screen between herself and society. She created a private room, a partition.
A partition. There's that word again.
Okay.
Item number 4, and this is the big one. This is the verse that is most often cited as the origin of the veil.
This is the one people point to.
This is it, Surah 33, verse 53. It instructs the believers that if they need to ask the prophet's wives for something, they should ask them from behind a curtain, hijab.
This is the architectural smoking gun, according to the source. Let's set the scene here, because context is everything.
Go ahead.
It's a wedding banquet. The prophet is hosting. The guests are lingering. They just won't leave. It's getting awkward. The prophet is famously too shy, too polite to kick them out.
A very human moment. We've all been there to party.
Very. And so the revelation comes down to established protocol. It says, don't enter the prophet's houses unless you were invited. And then it says, and if you ask his wives for something, ask from behind the hijab.
From behind it.
The preposition is key. The hijab here is a literal curtain hanging in a house. It is a domestic divider. It's like a room divider you'd buy at IKEA.
It's a door or a screen.
Basically, yes. It is separating the public space of the guests from the private quarters of the women who live there. If hijab meant headscarf, the verse would have to be written completely differently.
How so?
It would say something like, ask them and make sure they are wearing their hijab. But it says, ask them from behind the hijab. The hijab is the object standing between the two people. It is not on the woman's body.
It's an object in the room.
An architectural feature.
Okay, one more. Finally, item number 5, Surah 42, verse 51. It says, God does not speak to humans directly except through revelation or from behind a veil, hijab.
And there's the ultimate metaphysical barrier, the separation between the finite and the infinite, the creator and the created.
So let's synthesize this. Let's look at our data set. We have a barrier between heaven and hell. We have a cognitive block for disbelievers. We have Mary's seclusion screen. We have a curtain in the prophet's house. And we have the metaphysical distance of God.
5 clear data points.
And the empiricist's conclusion, my conclusion just looking at this data set laid out by the source, is that in every single one of these instances, hijab refers to a spatial partition, a curtain, or a metaphysical barrier.
And what does it not refer to?
It never, not once, refers to a piece of clothing on a woman's head.
And here is where the source brings in this concept of architectural justice.
Explain that.
The source argues that by redefining this word, we have committed a kind of crime against the language, a crime against the blueprint. If the word means wall or partition consistently across the entire text, how in the world did it become headscarf?
It's that linguistic sleight of hand we talked about at the top.
But it's more than that, the source argues. It's a deliberate conflation of purda, which is a concept that means being curtained off or secluded with personal clothing.
So confusing in action, to seclude with an object, a scarf.
Precisely. The source argues that the hijab is about distinction. It's about separating two things that shouldn't mix, like public and private space, or heaven and hell. When you apply that word to a woman, you are essentially saying she is the partition. She is the wall.
You are turning a human being into a walking boundary.
That is a heavy charge, isn't it? It implies that the language itself is being used to dehumanize, to turn a person into a structure.
And the source suggests that when we use hijab to mean headscarf, we are actually degrading the word itself.
Wow, so.
We're taking a term that describes the sacred separation of the divine, or the ultimate separation of heaven and hell, and we're turning it into a fashion item.
Reducing the cosmic to the cosmetic?
Exactly. But wait, let's play devil's advocate. Even if hijab isn't the correct word for the clothing, surely there is a dress code. I mean, that's the common understanding. Muslims believe the Quran mandates covering the hair.
Right.
So if the word hijab is the wrong word, is there another word? Is the mandate found somewhere else?
That is the perfect question. And it leads us directly to section 2. The source calls this the verse of the chest.
Right. So we need to look at the specific verses that people do use to mandate the head covering. This is in Surah 24, verses 30 and 31.
And this is where we have to get really, really granular with the translation. We need to put the text under a microscope and look at the actual Arabic words being used.
Okay, let me set the scene. Imagine we are opening a heavy door into an ancient library. We are blowing the dust off the manuscript and looking at the text itself. The command starts with, lower the gaze.
Which, importantly, is a command for both men and women. It starts with the eyes. The first point of control is internal. It starts with self-discipline.
Right, not external. But then it talks about what to cover. And the specific Arabic word used for the garment is khimar, and the specific body part mentioned is jubihina.
Okay, let's unpack those two terms because they are everything. Khimar, what does the source say that means?
The source defines khimar simply as a covering or a cloth. It's a generic term. It notes that a tablecloth can be a khimar. A blanket is a khimar. The source even says alcohol is related to the root word because it covers or clouds the mind.
So it's a generic cover. It doesn't inherently mean headscarf in the religious sense we use it today. It just means something that covers something else.
Exactly. Its meaning depends entirely on what it is covering. If you put a khimar on a table, it's a tablecloth. If you put it on your head, it's a head cover.
So the key question is, what does the verse tell women to cover with their khimar?
And that's the second word, juyubihina. The source translates this as bosoms or chests, specifically the cleavage area, the opening at the top of a dress.
So the instruction, literally, logically, is to take your cover, your khimar, and draw it over your chest, your juju.
Cover your chest.
That's the command.
But wait, here's where it gets complicated. If you open up a standard translation, let's say one you'd find in a hotel drawer or on a typical app, it often says something different.
It does.
It often says, draw their veils over their heads and faces and bosoms.
Ah, yes. The brackets. This is what the source calls the translation discrepancy. It highlights this relentlessly. It points out that for centuries, translators have been inserting words into the text, words that are not in the original Arabic.
So the words in the brackets,
Mm-hmm.
head, face, or hair,
Yeah.
those aren't there.
Not in the Arabic, no. The source argues that the original text does not mention the word rah, which is the specific Arabic word for head, and it does not mention the word shar, which is the specific Arabic word for hair.
So, to be clear, we have a specific command to cover the cleavage, the chest, but we don't have a specific command to cover the hair.
And this brings us to what the source calls the universal logic of the argument.
Okay.
The source posits that God is the sovereign intelligence, the ultimate architect of language. If he intended to mandate covering the face or the hair, he would have used the words for face and hair.
The vocabulary existed. It wasn't a mystery how to say head.
The vocabulary existed. The words ras and shar were common, available words. They just weren't used in this verse. The source argues that the addition of head or face in the translations is a corruption. It's humans adding to divine law. It's commentary disguised as scripture.
The source mentions a really striking example of this. It talks about a guy calling into a TV show from Glasgow.
Oh, I remember this part.
And he's reading a popular translation that said, and I'm paraphrasing, draw your coverings over their chests, faces, heads, hands, and only show their feet.
Only the feet. You see what happens? It's an accretion. It's like barnacles growing on the hull of a ship. The original hull is smooth and clear. Cover your chest. But centuries of cultural barnacles have been added, and head and face and hands and everything else.
And the source argues that these additions are actually a form of spiritual arrogance. It implies that God somehow forgot to mention these other body parts, so we, the human interpreters, have to fill in the blanks for him.
It's bracketed theology. You are building your religion on the words inside the brackets, not the words outside them. The human commentary becomes more important than the original text.
The source makes a really interesting theological comparison here to Iblis, Satan. It says Iblis promised to make earthly life appear attractive to deceive humans.
Right.
The source contrasts this with God allowing zina, or adornment.
It's an argument about intent. God created beauty. He created zina. The source argues that God isn't trying to trick us or suppress our nature. If he wanted women to be covered from head to toe, he would have said so plainly.
So by adding these extra layers, these brackets, human interpreters are essentially saying that female beauty is inherently a temptation, something evil, like a trick from Iblis.
But the source says no, beauty is God's creation. It's a gift.
So if the text says cover your chest and you say no, you must also cover your face and hair, you aren't being more pious. According to this author, you're actually violating the limits that God himself set.
Exactly. You are forbidding what God has allowed. And in the theology of the source, that is a very grave sin. You are overstepping your bounds.
This leads to a feeling of, well, the outline calls it intellectual vertigo, and it's the right term. Because if the Quran didn't mandate it, and if the word hijab just means a partition, where on earth did this come from?
That's the billion-dollar question.
Why does half the world believe this is the primary symbol of the faith if it's not in the foundational text?
If it's not in the book, we have to look at the history books. We have to do a historical audit. This is section 3, the origins of the veil.
And this is where the source tracks a timeline of pre-Islamic influences. And honestly, this is where it gets surprising. It points a finger directly at St. Paul.
The Christian connection, 600 years before Islam.
Specifically 1 Corinthians 11. I want to read the excerpt the source provides because it's so explicit. Paul writes, "Every woman that prayeth with her head uncovered dishonoreth her head."
That's pretty direct.
It gets more direct, he continues. "For if the woman be not covered, let her also be shorn."
Wow. Cover it or shave it out. That is a very specific and very harsh mandate.
And it predates Islam by 6 centuries. The source also points to the Jewish connection, the tradition of the mekitzah in synagogues.
Which is a partition, a curtain separating men and women during prayer.
It's the architectural hijab again. It's the same concept.
Exactly. And the source also mentions the custom of head coverings from married Jewish women in certain communities.
But the most fascinating connection for me in the source's analysis is the Persian and Byzantine connection.
Right, the two superpowers of the era.
The source claims that in these ancient empires, long before the prophet, elite women veiled their faces. But it wasn't religious. It was socioeconomic.
It was a status symbol.
Exactly. It was a sign of class. If you were a peasant woman, you were out in the fields. You were milking goats. You were harvesting wheat. You couldn't wear a face veil. You'd pass out from the heat.
And you couldn't be secluded. You had to work alongside men.
Right. Veiling was a sign that you were rich enough to stay indoors, that your husband was wealthy enough that you didn't have to labor.
Yeah.
You were rich enough to be kept.
So the argument is that when Islam expanded and conquered these areas, Persia, Byzantium, the early Muslims looked at these elite veiled women and thought, that looks high class, that looks prestigious, we should do that.
It was gentrification of the faith. I love that term. The conquerors adopted the customs of the conquered elite because they wanted to look like royalty.
And that's where their rationalists' diagnosis from the source comes in, and it's very firm on this. This isn't just borrowing culture. The source calls it ancestral worship.
That's a heavy term.
It is. It cites Surah 6, verse 148. The verse talks about people who excuse their idolatry by saying, this is what we found our fathers doing.
It's the classic traditionalist argument. We do it because it's always been done.
And the source argues that by adopting these customs, Pauline doctrine, Persian status symbols, and then stamping them with the label of Islam, believers are committing shirk.
And shirk means idolatry, the worst sin in Islam, associating partners with God.
Precisely. The source's argument is that if you follow the ways of the fathers or the customs of the Persians rather than the clear revelation of God in the Quran, you are essentially worshiping your ancestors. You are worshiping culture, not God.
That is a massive inversion. It's turning the whole thing on its head. Usually, people who wear the niqab or hijab are viewed by themselves in their community as the most pious.
The most devout.
And the source is saying they might actually be following pagan or Judeo-Christian cultural norms, not the Quran.
It creates a tremendous internal tension. The source points out the irony. You see Muslim men wearing Jewish skull caps, the white topia, and Muslim women wearing habits that look remarkably like those of Christian nuns.
So the source is asking, are you submitting to God, or are you submitting to the cultural memory of the ancient Near East?
It's a case of mistaken identity on a civilizational scale. You think you're being a fundamentalist Muslim, but you're actually dressed like a Byzantine aristocrat from the 5th century.
And that is the vertigo. The ground just falls out from under you.
It does.
This brings us to the why, then. If the text doesn't support it, and it comes from these other cultures, why has it stuck so firmly? Why is it so fiercely defended, often specifically by men?
Now we have to move from linguistics and history into psychology.
Right. This leads us to section 4, the psychology of the blinkers.
And this is where the source gets very provocative. It moves from analyzing texts to analyzing human behavior, specifically the psychology of the male gaze.
The source uses a really memorable, if jarring, analogy here: donkey blinkers.
It's visceral, isn't it? It frames the entire issue around control. Who is being controlled and why?
It argues that men are imposing the veil because they cannot control their own lustful animal nature.
Right. Remember the actual command in the Quran, the one we just talked about? The very first instruction in that verse for men was to lower their gaze.
Which is an internal action.
It's an internal software update. It requires self-discipline. It requires a man to take responsibility for his own eyes, his own thoughts.
But the source argues that instead of doing that difficult internal work, men have externalized the control. They have put blinkers on the women.
The logic becomes, I can't stop staring at you, so you must disappear. It's an abdication of personal responsibility.
So instead of a man training himself not to stare, he forces the woman to become a shapeless black form so there is nothing to stare at. He removes the problem from his field of vision.
And the source's argument is devastatingly simple. If a man needs a woman to be invisible in order to treat her with respect, the defect lies in the man, not the woman.
It's an admission of weakness.
It's saying, I have no self-control, so you must bear the burden of my lack of discipline.
But the counter-argument, and this is the one you hear all the time, is protection. That the veil protects women from harassment, from the male gaze.
And the empiricist, the host, has to look at the data provided by the source on this. It presents this idea of overexposed versus underexposed.
Right. The source presents a paradox. It says in the West, where women are arguably overexposed, bikinis, miniskirts, constant media exploitation, women are exploited and abused. The hashtag #MeToo movement proved that on a massive scale.
Which is true. The source isn't naive. It acknowledges that overexposure is its own form of exploitation and objectification.
But then it turns its lens to the traditional East, the underexposed world, the world of the full veil. And it finds that women there are also mistreated, repressed, and often harassed.
So the conclusion the source draws is vital. The cloth is not the protection.
It can't be.
The character of the society is the protection. If you have a society of men who don't respect women, a burqa won't save her. And if you have a society of men who do respect women, a miniskirt won't endanger her. The garment is irrelevant to the core issue of respect.
The source says, the sex urge has been described as a biological function, but this is not so. It is psychological.
And that is a key distinction. If it were purely biological, like hunger or thirst, men would be uncontrollable zombies. But the source argues we are human beings with what it calls sovereign intelligence. We have minds, we can control ourselves.
The source also tackles the related idea of segregation, the idea that men and women simply shouldn't mix, that it's too dangerous. It calls this the intermingling debate.
And again, it doesn't just theorize, it goes back to the data, the Quranic data. If segregation is a divine law, we should see it in the lives of the prophets, shouldn't we?
You would think. But we have Moses and the 2 shepherdesses in Surah 28. They're at a well, they're mixing with men, and Moses walks up and talks to them directly.
No curtain, no intermediary, no segregation. A direct, respectful conversation. He doesn't yell haram and run away. He helps them water their flocks.
We have the Queen of Sheba and Solomon in Surah 27. She, a powerful queen, enters his court. She speaks with him. They have a diplomatic exchange.
A woman in power, negotiating directly with a prophet, no segregation there.
We have Mary and Zechariah. He enters her private chambers to bring her food.
And so the source argues that segregation is an afterthought of weak men. It is not a divine decree. If the prophets, who are held up as the paragons of virtue, could interact with women respectfully in public and private, why can't modern men?
It's a scathing critique of modern masculinity, really.
Mm.
It implies that modern religious men are spiritually weaker than the prophets they claim to follow.
Because they require walls and curtains and partitions to behave themselves.
Which connects perfectly to Section 5. Because if the veil is a costume of piety for women, what else is a costume? The source turns its gaze to the men, specifically the beard and the hypocrisy.
A case study in inconsistent logic.
I found this section particularly interesting because it shows how the same kind of thinking gets applied elsewhere. The source deconstructs the narrative of the male beard.
We've all heard it, right? You must grow a beard to be a good Muslim man. It's part of the uniform. It's a sign of faith.
And the justification usually cites the hadiths, specifically from Bukhari, do the opposite of the pagans' Jews.
Right. The logic is identity through differentiation. We define ourselves by not being them. If they shave, we grow. If they wear bright colors, we wear muted colors. We must look different.
But the source points out a massive, glaring contradiction in that logic.
Which is?
Ancient Persians, who were fire worshippers, i.e. pagans, had magnificent beards. Orthodox Jews to this day have beards.
So if the command is do the opposite of them, and they have beards...
Shouldn't Muslims shave?
Exactly. The logic completely traps you. The source says that by growing a beard to be different, you are actually copying the ancient Persians and the Orthodox Jews. You aren't differing from them at all.
This is where the rational side of my brain just has to laugh a little. It exposes the fragility of costume piety.
That's the perfect term for it.
We get so obsessed with the aesthetic, the beard length, the ankle height of the trousers, the color of the hijab, that we completely miss the internal logic, or the lack thereof.
The source lists all the inconsistencies in the Hadith literature regarding dyeing hair, trimming mustaches, shaving. It's a total mess of contradictory instructions.
And the verdict from the source.
The verdict connects this all back to Surah 2, verse 177. And this is a beautiful, powerful verse. It explicitly defines righteousness. And it says, righteousness is not turning your face towards the east or the west.
It's not about the direction you pray or the external ritual.
No. The verse defines righteousness as belief in God, belief in the prophets, charity to the needy, fulfilling your contracts, and being patient in adversity.
Things that are hard.
Things that are incredibly hard, and what's not on that list.
Not beards, not veils, not white caps.
The source dismisses the beard and the veil as costume piety. It argues that we have substituted these easy external rituals for true, difficult righteousness because the rituals are easy.
That's a profound point. Growing a beard is easy. You just stop shaving.
Exactly. Wearing a scarf is easy. Mechanically, you just tie it on. But being honest in your business dealings when you could cheat and get rich, that's hard. Controlling your temper when you're provoked, that's hard. Treating your neighbor with kindness even when you disagree with them, that's the real work.
The source argues we have swapped the hard spiritual work for easy physical signals. We are signaling virtue rather than actually practicing it.
Performance.
Which leads us to the climax of the episode. Section 6. The theological climax. The garment of righteousness. If the hijab isn't the physical cloth, and the beard isn't the badge of honor, then what is? What is the real covering?
The source takes us to Surah 7, verse 26, and the soundscape here in our minds should just be a clear, resonant bell, a moment of absolute clarity.
The verse says, O children of Adam, we have provided you with garments to cover your bodies.
Okay, so it acknowledges physical clothing. It's necessary.
And as an adornment. But the best garment is the garment of righteousness. The Arabic word is taqwa, God consciousness.
The best garment is good conduct. It's stated right there. The priority is explicitly stated. The physical clothes are secondary. The spiritual clothing, your character, your integrity, your piety is primary.
If your character is naked, no amount of wool or linen can cover you.
That's it. But the source goes even further. It explores the concept of zina.
Which means?
Beauty. Adornment.
And the source quotes Surah 7, verse 32, which is a question. Say, who is there to forbid the beauty that God has brought forth for his servants?
That is a direct challenge to what you might call the uglification of faith.
The uglification of faith. I like that.
The source argues that God created beauty, aesthetics, and adornment. He is, in Islamic theology, the ultimate artist. So to enforce ugliness, to enforce total concealment, or to treat beauty as something inherently shameful is actually a rejection of God's bounty.
The rationalist argument here is so clear. If God made flowers beautiful and sunsets beautiful and peacocks beautiful, why would he want his highest creation, human beings, to be shapeless black sacks?
It's a rejection of the gift. It's like saying, God, you made a mistake making me look like this, so I'm going to hide it from the world.
And finally, the ultimate veil. This is the last piece of the puzzle. The source brings us back to that word hijab, but it gives it a final twisting interpretation based on Surah 17.45 and 6.25.
This is the twist that really hit me when I was reading this. It recontextualizes everything.
Okay, so let's unpack that. What is the final twist?
The source argues that in the Quran, the only veil God places is upon the hearts and minds of those who refuse to use reason.
Wait, say that again?
The verses talk about a hijab, a barrier placed on the hearts of those who deny the truth or refuse to think. The verse says, "We have placed veils on their hearts so they do not understand it, and deafness in their ears."
So the hijab in this context is a punishment, a spiritual blindness.
It's a consequence. It's a spiritual block that prevents understanding, a veil on the mind.
So the source argues that the physical veil, the niqab that cover the eyes, becomes a haunting metaphor for this spiritual veil.
The irony is just blinding. The source argues that by obsessing over covering the physical face, one might be displaying the very symptoms of a veiled heart.
A refusal to see the text clearly.
A refusal to use reason. To physically cover the eyes becomes a symbol of being mentally blind to the truth of the text.
To cover the eyes is to be blind to the truth.
The source suggests that the people most insistent on the physical veil might be the very ones God is talking about when he mentions the veil upon their hearts.
That is a devastating inversion. It takes the ultimate symbol of piety and turns it into a potential symbol of spiritual blindness.
It is the definition of intellectual vertigo.
So where does that leave us? I mean, we've gone from the dictionary definition to the architectural analysis, through history, psychology, and back to this really challenging theological climax. We've stripped the paint off the wall.
And we're left with the choice.
The outro. The final provocation. The source leaves the listener with a single, powerful challenge.
It's a question of authority, really. Who do you follow?
J.R. Ahmed writes, and this is the final thought, if the veil is not in the book, is wearing it an act of submission to God or submission to men?
That's the question, isn't it? If the data holds up, if the wall really is just a wall and not a wardrobe, then the entire edifice of mandated veiling is a human construction, a skyscraper built on a translation error.
Are you worshiping the architect or the people who came along later and redecorated the building?
We started with a piece of cloth, a simple garment. We ended with a critique of how history overgates theology. We ended with the idea that maybe, just maybe, the most modest thing you can do is to refuse to add to God's laws.
That's a lot to think about.
It is. It asks us to take off the blinkers, all of them, and to look at the world and maybe at the text with clear eyes.
We'll leave you with that thought. Thanks for diving deep with us.
Keep thinking.